Share via email. Report story. Chapter 3. The next day was overcast. Puddles from the previous night's storm riddled the path to the classroom building, but luckily the rain held off as the students walked to their classes. Izuku found himself walking with Aoyama. The twinkling boy skipped nimbly around the water on the ground, not letting a single drop soil his uniform or immaculately maintained shoes. Beside him, Izuku numbly splashed through every puddle ahead of him, paying no mind to the wet spots showing on his red high-top sneakers. Izuku was thinking, and he had been thinking since the previous night. He'd gone to bed thinking, fallen asleep thinking, and woken up thinking. Izuku had continued thinking, blinded by his thinking, until an enthusiastic Aoyama called out to him, and Izuku realized they had already reached their classroom. "We need to get inside, silly boy, or we'll be late." The two boys had been the last to arrive. Instinctively, Izuku's eyes scanned the room. He found Uraraka standing near her desk, talking with Iida and Sue. She had angled herself towards the doorway. Upon seeing him walk in, Uraraka caught his eye and sent him a tiny, endearing smile. He warmly returned the look. Uraraka and Izuku must have shared thousands of smiles since coming to UA. This one felt different, although Izuku couldn't explain how. It only lasted a second. Then Uraraka resumed her conversation, and Izuku went to his seat. They hadn't talked about what happened last night. When the rain had slowed to a sprinkle, they had abruptly broken off from each other with Uraraka quickly thanking him again for his help. They'd said a hurried good night to each other, went to their respective halves of the dorms, and that was that. Izuku hadn't been able to fall asleep afterwards. A new door had been thrown open and Izuku was desperately trying to unpack everything beyond it. The boy didn't know what time he had finally drifted off, but as soon as he'd woken up this morning his mind had been racing again. Part of him didn't want to talk to Uraraka about this. Izuku was still trying to sort through these feelings. What would he even say to her? Class started in the normal way. Iida announced for everyone to sit down, and Aizawa-sensei tonelessly read through the day's agenda. Their homeroom teacher had barely finished speaking when Present Mike burst into the room, impassioned and hopping ready to begin the day's English course. The voice hero's manner was brash, but Izuku was grateful for any excuse to get out of his own head. He dove into the classwork. English wasn't his best subject. The concentration the topic required was a welcome relief. Once Present Mike's time was up, he gleefully dished out homework, left the room, and was replaced by a coolly confident ectoplasm. The hero loomed, omnipotent, over his cowl. "Good morning. Do you remember our last lesson?" There was a reluctant shuffling of papers and pencils as the students braced themselves. Definite integrals. Again, Izuku stuffed his brain full of numbers, equations, and numerals until the bell signaled lunch. He was starving. He'd skipped breakfast that morning, and Izuku wasted no time filling his plate with lunch rush's unbeatable food. He slid into an empty lunch table. Just as he was breaking apart his chopsticks, Uraraka sat down across from him. They both looked at each other. She smiled, he smiled, then they were joined by their friends, and the seats filled around them. For the rest of the lunch period, everything felt just as it always had. Uraraka goaded Iida into going off on one of his fervent tangents. Mina and Kaminari aired their frustrations over the increasing complexity of ectoplasm's equations. Kirishima and Tetsutsutis had an eating contest. Jiro discussed guitar chords with Tokiyami. The time was filled with friends and classmates, all unwinding after the first half of their stressful academic day, refueling for what the afternoon had to offer. Promoted stories. You'll also like Hurt 'Cause I Love You to Death Iswocha. Ha. .8.6K141 Class 1A is now Class 2A and is working to be better heroes due to events that had happened before. Deku has gotten strong feelings toward Uraraka during the summer as feelings. Aizawa. X-Reader 57.1K 1.3 KRE posting. This until I edit it, sorry if it's not good, it's my first time writing a story. You enroll at UA and you have multiple quirks you are really good at using, why? The Kings and Queen Yandere Wakfu X Reader 54.9K 1.7 Kyonder. Wakfu X Reader. Images do not belong to me unless stated. Wakfu does not belong to me, it belongs to Enigma. This is being rewritten in another book on my profile. Her prince from the underworld, half demon is. 0.25.5K 450. It's basically the same story as my Succubus Momo X Deku story. I know, real original, but hey, now you guys get a Deku from the other side of the tracks. Finished. 8.3K 508 tilde. He save all of them, just a smile plastered on his face before disappearing through the wind. Izuku's Harem Academia 183K 1.7 Cust. Read. They all walked back to their homeroom in a group. Uraraka mentioned being frustrated by definite integrals and Izuku offered to help without a second thought. She responded with her usual infectious cheer. A mutual sense of relief passed between the pair. Everything was as effortless as ever. Maybe nothing had to change. The bell rang as the students all took their seats. A puffy yellow sleeping bag emerged from behind the teacher's desk. Aizawa sluggishly removed himself from his cocoon while telling the class to calm down and prepare for their hero course for the day. Around the room, everyone tensed with anticipation. Would they work on ultimate moves? Rescue training? Combat drills? Today we'll be reviewing the history of Hero Society and how the current laws regarding quirk utilization came into effect. A collective moan echoed through the class. Contrary to most of his classmates, Izuku was excited for the lesson. Since his early years, the boy had been cramming his head full of any hero facts he could get his hands on. It was doubtful Aizawa Sensei would be covering anything he didn't already know, but the chance to hear it all again through the perspective of a pro put Izuku on the edge of his seat. Before Aizawa could even begin, Izuku's pencil was already posed inside his notebook. As the lecture commenced, the fanboy filled page after page with notes, diagrams, amendments, questions, and ideas. Izuku was in prime form. At the edge of Izuku's bubble of awareness came a dull, familiar sound. While turning a page in his notes, Izuku glanced out the windows to his left. The clouds had finally broke. It was raining. Persistent water drops fell across the campus in concussive rhythm. The rainfall pulled the hero-obsessed boy from his note-taking as memories swirled across his mind. His brain failed. His heart took the wheel. The sound of rain, hiding under an overhang, droplets running down Uraraka's cheeks. Her fingers wrapped in his. So close, an unspoken urge to drift closer. Closer. Izuku's thoughts came faster and faster now. It was like watching a marathon of films in fast forward. Jokes, fantasies, flashbacks, guilt, fear, they all came shooting through Izuku's mind in a blur too quick and disjointed to sort. Midoriya, I know this might not seem like the most interesting subject for everyone, but it's an important part of your education as future heroes. Aizawa Sensei's monotone reprimand dragged Izuku out of his daydream. He found the rest of the class looking at him with repressed chuckles as Aizawa fixed him with a menacing gaze. Yes, it's rain. It's wet and it falls from the sky. I know it's exciting, but please try to focus. Yes, Sensei. Sorry, Sensei. And that goes for the rest of you too. Aizawa directed his disapproval across the room. Pay attention. Stop getting distracted. At his last sentence, their teacher shot a disciplinary glare towards the back of the class. Izuku followed the look to find Uraraka sitting up stiffly in her seat. She seemed very preoccupied with her notes and the arrangement of her papers. A sprinkle of color dotted her cheeks. Satisfied with the class participation, Aizawa continued his lesson undisturbed. The rest of the instruction passed slowly and without incident. When the bell finally rang, their teacher wasted no time crawling back into his sleeping bag and plopping himself down in the usual spot behind his desk. Izuku was gathering his things when an explosively familiar hand slapped down on his desktop. Kacchan fixed his rival with a competitive scowl, chin up. You better bring your A game today, nerd. I gotta make up ground after that boring-ass lecture. I'll do my best, Izuku assured, fixing Kacchan with a faultless grin. His rival sulked off, hands in pockets, mumbling harshly. All Might had taken the liberty of scheduling time at one of the school's training rooms for the two boys to spare. 3 afternoons a week, the rivals faced off in the controlled environment. As the boys continued to grow, it served as a much-needed outlet to test their limits. All Might always insisted on chaperoning, claiming he wanted to observe their improvements, although Bakugo always objected it would just keep them from going all out. Most of the class had dispersed off to their own afternoon pursuits. Izuku woke a grumpy Aizawa to hesitantly ask how Eri was adjusting. After reassurances that the girl was faring well and that they could visit her soon, Aizawa sent the young hero on his way. Izuku was the last to leave the room. The hallways were far from deserted, with the weather encouraging everyone to stay indoors, but it seemed all members of Class 1A had cleared out. Izuku still had to change into his hero costume before meeting All Might and Bakugo, but there was no need to rush. As Izuku neared the front doors, his mind threatened to drift back to the same thoughts he'd had that morning, but he swatted them away. He could unpack the swirling storm of confusion in his heart later. For now, he'd had a good day of classes and was on his way to train. Izuku was calm. Peaceful, even. Uraraka appeared out of a stairwell ahead of him. Half the students in the hallway looked around as Izuku made a sound like a stepped-on cat. Uraraka saw him, and waited for the boy. Are you okay, Deku? Yes, I'm fine. What was that sound you made? Just, realized all the work I have to do to keep up with our classes. The girl seemed unconvinced, but accepted it all the same. Heading back towards the dorms. She was too. I was returning a research article one borrowed from 13, Uraraka said while they walked down the hall. You should have seen their face light up when I told them I read the whole thing. Well, they wear a helmet so I couldn't actually see their face, but still. We're going to schedule some time to discuss it next week. She beamed ear to ear, her eyes alight. That's great, Uraraka. Earlier in the day, everything had felt uncomplicated. Now all it took was a smile to turn Izuku's nerves into jelly. He knew it wasn't just any smile. It was her smile that did it. Not for the first time that day, Izuku vowed to get a hold of himself. The pair stepped outside the front doors. Still raining, Izuku unslung his bag to retrieve his umbrella, only to find it wasn't there. Of course, he thought. With his brain as muddled as it had been this morning, he had been bound to forget something. Looking at the rain spilling off the overhang before them, Izuku weighed his options. It wasn't coming down too hard, but it was still enough to soak through his uniform and backpack by the time he reached the lockers and training gyms. What's wrong? Uraraka had already pulled out her own small umbrella and was zipping her bag back up. I must have forgot my umbrella today. He did his best to put on a reassuring grin, but it came out as a flimsy half-smile. That's okay. Here, we'll share mine. What little bastion of self-possession Izuku had managed to recover fled in an instant. Oh, no, it's fine, I can just walk without. I mean, I appreciate it but... Deku, Uraraka soothed, you'll get wet. You're helping me train my quirk, the least I can do is share my umbrella with you. For how flustered she made the boy, it was amazing how easily she could calm his nerves. Uraraka popped open her umbrella. Pink, Izuku thought. She held it aloft, high enough for Izuku to slip underneath, expecting no further objections. He didn't give any. Keeping both their heads ducked under the pink shelter, they stepped out into the rain. As the pair began walking, Ochako darted a quick look up and down the path. Most students had already left the main campus or had decided to continue their studies inside. Izuku and her would be mostly alone as they walked back to Heights Alliance. Ochako was grateful. She didn't think she could bear the barrage of teasing Mina or Toru would put up if they saw the pair walking back together. And sharing an umbrella no less. Actually, Ochako gently thought, this had turned out perfect. For as long as she had realized her feelings for Izuku, Ochako had resigned herself to keeping them locked away. But last night had changed things. Ochako didn't know if she had grabbed Izuku's hand first, or if he had grabbed hers. Surely it had just been an accident, but neither of them had let go and surely that meant something. She'd made up her mind. She had to tell Izuku about how she felt. There was no way around it, she'd tell him, and if he didn't return her feelings, that was okay. And if he did, Ochako didn't dare let herself think that far ahead. She'd spent last night and a good portion of the day rehearsing and re-rehearsing exactly what she'd say. Ochako had to make it clear that there was no obligation for Izuku to reciprocate. He had his dreams and she had hers. If they decided they had to focus exclusively on their goals, then that was perfectly fine. But she had to tell him. She had to let Izuku know where her heart was before it got the better of her. There might not be a better opportunity than this. The pair walked on. The umbrella wasn't exactly small, but it certainly wasn't designed for two. They stepped shoulder to both fit underneath. The proximity was all too similar to the previous night and summoned unbidden memories of how her hand felt in his. It did nothing to help calm the fluttering in Ochako's chest. She hoped Izuku hadn't noticed her flustering. Ochako shot him a quick glance and was grateful to see Izuku looking distracted by his own thoughts, absently watching the side of the path. There was always an idle calculation hidden behind those green eyes, now more than ever. They walked on and neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the ambiance of the weather around them and the wet scuffling of their shoes on the pavement. Ochako found herself dancing with indecision. She had to say something to break the silence and get the ball rolling. But every time she opened her mouth she'd hesitate, seeing the deep thought behind Izuku's eyes. What if he was thinking of something important? He won't mind you interrupting. She'd just wait until he was done thinking. You know he could think his way through the whole walk back. How am I supposed to grab his attention? You could take his hand. No. The thought startled Ochako enough that a cascade of water droplets shook loose from the umbrella, and they pattered to the ground around them. Izuku turned to her blinking. Here, he said, let me take a turn holding it. She smiled gratefully. They handed the umbrella off delicately, as if it was made of glass. Ochako cleared her throat. She said, actually, I wanted to talk with you about last night. And she was suddenly overwhelmed by it all. There was Izuku, right beside her, and she was actually going to tell him. And Ochako found herself forgetting every word of the carefully delicate things she had rehearsed saying to him. But now she had to say something. She could feel his attention on her. Had she not been so overwhelmed, she might have noticed the heat blossoming on Izuku's cheeks. It's just, well, you know, she stumbled. There was the thunder, and the storm. It was surprising, so yeah. She looked at him. He looked at her. It was a disaster. Yeah, Izuku responded, turning forward. Of course. Alright, gee good. Ochako was embarrassed and disappointed and absolutely furious. She'd slithered out of confessing her feelings. Last night echoed through her head. The memory of their hands wrapped together lingered. If there was ever a chance to talk with Izuku about her feelings, this was it. And she just couldn't do it. She wished she could have remembered all her delicate remarks. This, she thought, just showed what happened when she let herself get flustered. For the 100th time, she told herself that maybe it was for the best. Maybe it was better for her to keep pushing this down as she had been. She was simply resigned to it. There was classwork, there was work studies, there was a future career as a hero. That should be her focus. She didn't have time for anything else. It would be a mistake. She didn't fight to get into UA to be distracted like this. But it's Deku. She banished the thought. The pair continued on in silence. Rain tapped softly against the umbrella. The space under their little bit of canvas suddenly felt very warm and tight. To distract herself, Ochako did what she'd done the night before. She focused on the rain. She took a breath in again. There was that fragrant, earthy smell. Fresh rainfall. What was that word again? She couldn't remember it last night and she couldn't recall it now. It hadn't been long ago that the word had come up in class, but she just couldn't think of it. Her failure to remember the word only added to her annoyance and disappointment. She was so very preoccupied with the thought that she didn't hear Izuku say her name. He had to repeat himself before Ochako snapped out of her trance. His face looked troubled. She must have looked silly, spacing out like that. Everything's fine, she said, blinking rapidly. It's just the rain. It smells so nice. I was trying to remember the word for it. Petrichor. Spinning to look at him, Ochako nearly knocked the umbrella out of his hand. The smell of rain, Izuku nervously clarified, as if he might have said something wrong. That's the word, petrichor. It was in one of Smentos's assigned readings a couple weeks ago, and I had to look it up. Ochako's surprise slowly metamorphosed into dawning gratitude. She fixed him with the sweetest look she could manage. Petrichor. She was so pleased to have that sorted. She didn't even notice the way Izuku tripped and almost dropped the umbrella when she beamed up at him. You're right, Petrichor. Ochako trailed off, suddenly reflective. She looked down the path. The small curl to her lips was effortless. Thanks, Deku. Izuku insisted it was no problem, but he sounded confused. Well, let him be confused, Ochako thought. They were nearly at the dorms already. Training tonight? Izuku asked. Let's see, Ochako said while whipping out her phone. She checked the forecast and saw nothing but gray skies for the rest of the week. It looks like it's going to keep raining. We should probably hold off until the weather improves. Rain check, Izuku joked. Ochako lit up. Exactly. Izuku shook the umbrella, sending a flurry of water droplets to the ground. He tried to hand it back, but Ochako wouldn't take it. You're going straight to the training gyms to spare with Bakugo, right? Use it to keep dry and return it to me later. Izuku opened his mouth, but the look Ochako shot him made him shut it. Uraraka disappeared into the dorms, and Izuku lingered for a moment watching the front doors. His mouth was a thin, scrawny line of indecision. The thunder, he thought. The rain, it had just surprised them. That was all. He looked up at the pink umbrella. Then he turned and began walking towards the training gyms. The boy seemed to drift through a haze as he prepared to meet All Might and Kacchan, his thoughts circling back on themselves, an endless mantra, repeated again and again. The thunder, the rain, it had just surprised them. That was all. Izuku mechanically walked to the training gyms with the pink umbrella keeping him dry. Thunder. Rain, it had just surprised them. That was all. Izuku entered the locker rooms and changed out of his school uniform. Thunder, rain, surprised them. That was all. Izuku absent-mindedly put on his gear. Thunder, rain, surprised them. That's all. Izuku distantly heard All Might blow the whistle and barely registered Bakugo lunge straight for him. Boom. The blast knocked Izuku off his feet. He tumbled through the air, landing halfway across the court in a disheveled pile of discontent and embarrassment. What the hell, Deku? Why are you holding back? Bakugo's frustration echoed to the rafters. Am I not strong enough? How long had they been sparring? Izuku just couldn't pull it together. He sat up off the ground. All Might looked at him with tempered concern, while Kacchan stewed in a blistering rage. Young Midoriya, his mentor ventured, you seem distracted today. Izuku had been hoping to avoid this. All Might and Kacchan, if he lied, they'd see through him in an instant. I'm distracted, yeah. My heart is all stirred up. Sorry. Stirred up? Is this about one for all? No, it's not that. Izuku swallowed. He'd practically worshipped All Might since he was a small boy, and Kacchan and Izuku had grown up together. This was beyond embarrassing. Why did it have to be them he was confessing this to? It's just, think. What I mean is. Spit it out, you damn nerd. Quote. I have a crush. There it was. Saying it out loud was both a weight off his chest and a terrifying confirmation. The air in the gymnasium suddenly felt heavy. Bakugo squinted at him like Izuku had just said the sky was green. All Might looked equally dumbfounded. Young Bakugo, a second, if you don't mind. All Might pulled Kacchan a small distance away. Izuku watched them cautiously. The former number one hero and symbol of peace covered his mouth with a frail hand and whispered to Bakugo in hushed tones. Despite All Might's attempts at secrecy, Izuku saw the hurried glances shot his way. What? Kacchan was incredulous. You want me to talk to him about it? You're his mentor or whatever. You do it. All Might doubled down, still whispering. In his frantic tones Izuku made out something about support and fated rivalry. Bakugo clearly wasn't having it. All Might placed his fists on hips. He sternly declared, heroes not only save people, they save their hearts too. Now go. Kacchan's entire body seemed to coil with repressed energy, a spring about to burst. Then, deliberate step by deliberate step, he made his way slowly over to Izuku. His footsteps landed like stones. Bakugo let out a huff as he crashed down on the floor next to Izuku, who kept his wide eyes trained on his rival. The angry boy kept repeatedly flexing his hands into fists as his whole body writhed with loathing. The tips of Bakugo's mouth twitched frantically. Was he trying to keep from sicking up? No, Izuku suddenly realized, Kacchan was trying to smile. This was terrifying. It was like sitting next to a warhead. You have a crush, Deku. The force of each word hit like a punch to the gut. It took a few seconds to find some semblance of composure. Yeah, Izuku swallowed. But I'm beginning to think it's even more than that. Kacchan's red eyes spun to glare at his rival. Izuku felt like he was trapped in a tiger cage. Uraraka, how? Izuku shot the question down before he could ask. It wouldn't do any good to draw out Kacchan's rage. Instead Izuku gave him a tight, quick nod. Yeah, I knew it, she's strong. No wonder you're worried, a weakling like you. Izuku let the disparaging remark slide off him. It's not. What I mean is, I think it's more than just a crush. I've had these feelings for a while, but never realized. Just tell her already. Kacchan, it's not that simple. Why the hell not? Why's it gotta be so damn complicated? That was a good point, Izuku thought. Why did it have to be so complicated? I don't know what to do. The other night we kind of held hands and then. What? Bakugo was on his feet in an instant. His palms flashed vehemently. Then what the hell are we sitting here talking about it for? Just tell her already. Dumbass. We're done talking. Stand up and fight me. But it's not. I said fight me, Deku. No point trying to continue the conversation now. Izuku pulled himself up and prepared himself for Bakugo's assault. The day slowly bled into night, and night into the next day. One day passed and then another. The rain continued. Izuku and Ochako carried on about their classes and training. Izuku walked alone through an expansive lobby. The face of Tamura Shigaraki was displayed on a large screen above the center of the room. He wore a coat with a deep hood, obscuring all but his pale hair and the stiff, corpse-like hand grasping his face. His hands were folded atop a table in front of him. He appeared to be talking directly into a camera. There must have been over 100 people in the lobby. Startled, Izuku realized they weren't just normal people. They were all villains. Every one of them had stopped what they were doing to listen to Shigaraki, with serious expressions on their faces. Tamura Shigaraki was about to announce something big. Izuku stopped and watched the screen. Shigaraki was speaking of destruction, destroying society, this world, everything. The words themselves were insane, and yet the villain was speaking in practiced, sincere tones, as if he was addressing millions of people. The more Izuku heard, the angrier he became, until he almost felt choked by it. Shigaraki spoke as if addressing the whole world, but Izuku knew the villain was in fact talking to him alone. His speech twisted its way into Izuku's head. Shigaraki was exploiting this gathering to send him secret messages and distort his judgment. The villain was trying to make him forget why he was here. But why was Izuku here? He'd already forgotten. He clenched his hands into fists, but there was no way Izuku could vent his anger without drawing the attention of the villains. He felt isolated. Around him, the villains strained to catch every word that Shigaraki spoke. None of them would notice if he left. Izuku cut straight across the room and headed directly for a corridor to the side. Stepping out from the crowd, a villain blocked his path, well dressed with a shimmering violet aura. Izuku recognized the villain from the attack on USJ, Kurogiri. The strange fog-like villain simply stood there, watching the boy approach. Izuku pushed him aside as he passed, but Kurogiri made no attempt to stop him. With confusion, Izuku spun back to look at the villain, and saw the fog above his metallic collar shift and condense into a face. A new face, quite unlike the ambiguous, yellow-eyed mask of particles Kurogiri normally displayed. This new face was pained and terribly sad, watching Izuku with a silently open mouth. Izuku tore his eyes away and ran on with rapid steps. He couldn't let himself be afraid. He had to figure out why he was here. The corridor looked exactly like the dorms at Heights Alliance, but stretching endlessly on and on. Izuku ran down the familiar-looking hall. He had thought the villains would follow and try to stop him, but upon looking back he saw no one coming. The long corridor was lined with identical doors to the ones in the dorms, stretching down either side. Each one belonged to a student, but Izuku had lost all sense of direction and there was no way to tell which door belonged to which student. His attempts to recall whose door belonged to who yielded nothing. Suddenly, there came an echoing, muffled shout in a voice he knew. He sprinted down the corridor. Izuku nearly passed by the door before he heard a voice call from the other side. Midoriya, help, Iida. It was Iida on the other side of the door. With a start, Izuku realized why he was here. He was here to rescue his friends from the villains. Stopping outside the door, Izuku grasped the door knob and timidly turned the handle. It rotated with a satisfying click. He hadn't expected it to be unlocked. Throwing the door open, he gave a shout, Iida, I'm here. The room was empty. It was exactly like their bedrooms in the dorms, but devoid of belongings. Furniture, desk, chair, bed frame, all stood abandoned. The shelves were empty of books, and even Ida's expansive inventory of eyeglasses were gone. The haze of neglect hung over the room. There was no one inside. Izuku was sure he'd heard Ida's voice call out. Where was he? Another shout echoed down the corridor, and Izuku spun to face the endless hall of doors. Midoriya, Midoriya, we need you. That was Shoji and Jiro. He was sure of it. One for all coursed through him as he shot towards the doors their voices had come from. He wrenched open the first door just as Shoji had called out again, only for the shout to be cut off as soon as the door flew open. Another empty room. He jumped to the next one, where Jiro's shout had come from, to find it also abandoned. The stale air was suddenly filled with cries and shouting. Midoriya. What are you waiting for? Help us. The voices piled on top of one another, echoing down the corridor. They grated into Izuku's ears as he ran through the hall, opening every door he found. Ojiro, Kaminari, Aoyama, Hagakure, Tsu, Ashido, Koda, Sato, Tokiyami, Mineta, Shiro, Hiroshima, Yaoyorozu. Midoriya, hurry, hurry up, bastard, Todoroki. Bakugo. Every door was unlocked, every room empty, but the shouts continued. He wasn't quick enough. He had to move faster. The manic laughter of Tamura Shigaraki began echoing up and down the corridor. It taunted Izuku, growing louder with each empty room, reverberating through his skull. There was no end to it. Deku. Izuku froze. Uraraka. That was Uraraka. Shigaraki's cackling pierced his head. The villain had his friends. He had Uraraka. Spinning in the direction of her cry, he saw an end to the corridor. A wide set of expensive double mahogany doors, varnished to a perfect sheen. Uraraka's voice had come from there. Without hesitation, Izuku sprinted towards the doors, the crackle of one for all straining his bones, Shigaraki's endless laughter pursuing him. Izuku was impassioned, reckless. He smashed through the double door, splinters flying past his quirk-enhanced kick. Uraraka. His shout was cut off as he faced a dark swirling vortex. Reaching out of the void was the pale hand of Tamura Shigaraki. Uraraka's cries for help echoed in his ears, and above that was the villain's, crazed, endless laughter. The palm of Tamura Shigaraki's hand filled Izuku's vision. The world crumbled away. Izuku woke upright in his bed. He immediately reached up and touched his face. 2 eyes, nose, chin. Everything felt normal. Izuku ran fingers through his tangled hair. He'd been sweating in his sleep. Throwing the sheets off, he put his legs over the edge of the bed. The floorboards were cool under his feet and helped ground his senses. Yes, this was real. That large lobby, the endless corridor, his friends in trouble, it had all been a nightmare. Just a dream. They were safe in Heights Alliance. Raindrops rapped softly against his window. That's right, he thought. Uraraka and him had postponed their training again on account of another rainy forecast. He glanced at his alarm clock. It was just past midnight. He thought about laying back down. Tomorrow was their day off from classes. Izuku planned to visit his mom in the morning, but hoped to squeeze in a run before that. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, the boy stood up after a nightmare like that. He couldn't just go back to sleep. Izuku found his slippers with his toes and put them on. The sweat on his back chilled as he walked across the room. Izuku opened the door hesitantly to find the hallway quiet and still. The similarity to his dream was uncanny. But this hallway wasn't endless, and Izuku knew his classmates were sleeping soundly in their rooms. With the lights off, Izuku guided himself by instinct. He took the staircase down to the common room. It was dark, but Izuku's eyes needed no time to adjust. He went to the kitchen and switched on the light. Its ambiance spilled out over the rest of the common areas, bathing everything in a soft glow. He grabbed a glass out of the cabinet, filled it with water, and drank gratefully. The relief was almost immediate. The water further reassured him that he was rooted firmly in reality, not another dream. Making his way to the seating area, Izuku plopped down on a sofa. He closed his eyes, letting his head hang back, trying to clear his mind. It was impossible. Shadows filled his head. In his dream, Shigaraki had seemed desperate to get Izuku. Why did the villain know about One for All? That was impossible, right? Izuku could still see Shigaraki's hand reaching out of the darkness for him. He heard his friends crying out. Deku. Izuku almost sprang out of his seat, spilling water over his hand. He whirled to find Uraraka standing on the other side of the common room. She sounded tired. Had she been up studying? No, he realized. She was dressed for bed in a pale pink t-shirt and dark shorts. Uraraka's slippers were plain and cream-colored, like Izuku's. Her hair stuck out at odd angles to one side, but somehow she still made his chest thumb. How did she manage to do that, anyway? Rubbing absent-mindedly at her eyes, Uraraka asked, "What are you doing down here?" He hesitated. Izuku didn't want to worry her. However, he didn't like lying to his friends. Especially not Uraraka. "I had a bad dream," he said, shaking water off his hand. "I couldn't get back to sleep. How about you?" "I had a nightmare too. She dreamed villains broke into the school and they all had to fight past them to get everybody out. Once I woke up, I started thinking about my work study. And then my parents. I had trouble falling back to sleep, so I came down to get a glass of water." As if saying it out loud jogged her memory, Ochako sleepily made her way to the kitchen and got out a glass. After filling it, she walked over to where Izuku was sitting, holding the glass in both hands. Izuku was staring absently at his slippers. His hair, usually a mess anyway, stuck out more haphazardly than usual, and his t-shirt and shorts were wrinkled from sleeping. Now that Ochako got a better look, Izuku's cheeks looked pale. There were bags under his eyes and a worried hunch to his shoulders. "Can I sit?" she asked. He nodded. She sat next to him, being careful not to spill. They both sipped their water. Catching each other's eye, they quickly shot their gazes back onto their water glasses. Outside of classes and training, the pair hadn't spent much time together the last few days. It was easy to say they were both too busy, but neither of them really believed it. Their last conversation while walking through the rain hung around them like a fog. Now here they were, sitting together in the common area, late at night, in their sleep clothes. It felt so honest and intimate that the pair just stayed put, refusing to look at each other. The pitter-patter of rain against the windows echoed through the empty room. "Your parents are okay though, right?" Izuku's question cut through the tension. Ochako repositioned herself on the couch as she nodded. "Yeah, they're okay. I can't help worrying about them, though. I guess I'm always worrying about them." She felt Izuku look at her. "That's a lot to worry about, on top of classes." "It is, but," Ochako began twiddling her fingers, one index finger orbiting around the other. "An old nervous habit. I just want to help them so badly. It's frustrating. We've come so far, but we still have a long way to go before we become pros. I'm scared that I won't be able to help my parents at all or anyone." In a quiet voice, she added, "That probably seems like a silly thing to lose sleep over." "I'm scared to death sometimes," Izuku volunteered. Ochako looked at the boy to find reassurance and warmth. "I'm scared most of the time, actually. Sometimes I'm so scared I can hardly stand it, scared of not living up to being a hero, of failing those I care about, a lot of stuff. Every time we see the world of the pros, we realize how much farther we need to go. It can make us feel helpless. But you're anything but helpless, Uraraka. You're going to help your parents and save tons of people. I know it. Smiling, Ochako turned back to her water and took a small sip. They sat comfortably in silence. It felt relaxed now, just like it used to be, just like it always was. Ochako asked, "Is that what your dream was about? Being helpless? Maybe. I don't know." Izuku told her about his dream, about Shigaraki on the large screen, the villains, the endless corridor, and their friends crying out for his help. When he'd finished, Ochako was regarding him with a look of such worry that Izuku wondered if he had said too much. Deku. He laughed, but it was airy and uncommitted. Repeating it back, "It really sounds like I've been under a lot of stress, doesn't it?" "You have." Ochako nodded, grinning in the friendliest way. "But we're all in this together." Then, Ochako shot her arm up so fast that Izuku nearly fell off the couch. "Our batteries are just low," she declared. "We just need to find a way to charge our batteries. That's all." Izuku was caught off guard. "Charge our batteries." Ochako lowered her arm, but her delight was unmistakable. "That's what my parents used to say. When things got really bad, they'd say they ran out of electricity and they wouldn't be able to sleep. Sometimes for days. The minute they'd close their eyes, they'd wake up and wouldn't get back to sleep. When it'd get like that, they'd say they needed to charge their batteries. They'd hold each other for a while, and it would recharge their batteries, and they could sleep. It's true." Izuku blinked. Then he thought his brain might short circuit. "So we just need to have our batteries charged." She turned towards him, her face filled with light and amusement, and gave him an energetic nod. Izuku swallowed. Maybe, he thought, they could. No, what was he even thinking? Uraraka couldn't have meant it that way. But maybe if I ask. Now Izuku's brain really did short circuit. He spun away from Uraraka before she could see his face erupt in a full-on blush. Had his heart ever beaten this fast before? Was he really going to ask? "Deku?" she timidly asked. "Is something wrong?" He practically retreated to the other side of the couch, facing away from her. Was it something she'd said? Izuku was gripping the couch cushion so tightly, she thought he might tear off a chunk. Ochako leaned towards him, but that only seemed to make things worse. After a few seconds of fumbling noises, Ochako heard him stammer, I was thinking WWEC could." She blinked. The last time she'd heard Deku stammer like this was when she'd introduced herself their first day of class. What had gotten into him? Thinking we could do what? Izuku mumbled something. He spoke so quietly, Ochako had hardly been sure he'd said anything at all. "Huh?" she asked with a curious tilt to her head. "What was that, Deku?" Barely any louder, he spoke again, and she strained to hear. "Do you want to try charging each other's BBB batteries?" Utter horror streaked through Izuku's mind as the question left his mouth, his green eyes growing wider and wider by the word. What had he just asked? Ochako blinked. Then she blinked again. What Izuku said slowly dawned on her. She turned red as a cherry, and was suddenly very glad he wasn't looking at her. Had she heard him right? He'd spoken so softly, maybe she misheard him. No, she thought, no, he definitely said. Desperately, she fought the urge to cover her face. I mean. Izuku corrected. Just because we're both stressed. And having trouble sleeping. Maybe that's a stupid idea. We can just go back to our rooms. You mean, like, Ochako began, trying to keep her voice calm, holding each other. Well, no, yes, I mean, maybe we can just try, sitting close to each other. And see if that works. Quote dot. Why yeah, okay, sure, really, MMHMM. They briefly looked at each other from opposite ends of the couch, both wide-eyed and too distracted to notice the redness covering the other's face. Oh gosh, they both thought as they snapped their heads forward. Nervously, stiffly, they began gingerly scooting towards each other, inch by agonizing inch, eyes averted and cheeks lit up like sunsets. Sooner than either one expected, they felt a brush of the other's shoulder and stopped with muffled yelps. Ochako squeezed the bottom of her shirt for courage. Izuku swallowed and tried desperately to keep from shaking, just letting their shoulders touch. That was all, but still their hearts pounded in their ears. Failing miserably to slow down their racing minds, the pair stayed that way. A minute passed, then another. Neither of them made a sound. Their eyes were fastened forward. Izuku found he was counting the seconds and made himself stop. Ochako felt like her face would burn off and fumbled to breath slowly. How long until their batteries charged? How long should they keep this up? Neither of them knew. They sat tense and perfectly aligned, as if the smallest twitch would cause disaster. After what seemed an eternity, Izuku realized he was clenching up so hard that his shoulders and back were sore. He found it increasingly difficult to breathe and forced himself to take slow, steady breaths. He dared a teetering glance at Uraraka. She must be warm, he thought. Why else would her cheeks look so red? Finally, after he didn't know how long, Izuku felt himself calming. Now that the thumping in his ears stopped, this wasn't so difficult. He began to notice the gentle patter of rain on the windows, soft light spilling out over the common room. And there beside him was Uraraka. She didn't seem nearly as stiff as he was. Her shoulder was warm against his. A subdued floral scent drifted through the air. Was that her? Izuku suddenly felt dizzy. And then, in the late-night haze, with rain tapping on the windows and growing more comfortable by the minute, Izuku thought that maybe he would tell Uraraka about the feelings he was having.
What do you do, skinny bushes?
Just tell her already, Kachan had said, and Izuku thought perhaps he should. But he hadn't prepared for this. Quite the opposite. Izuku had done his best to push all of it down for the last couple days. Maybe if Izuku could keep his heart from racing for just a moment he could come up with some way to articulate what he was feeling. It was no use. Maybe Kachan or Shiro or even Kirishima would have known what to say, but Izuku was absolutely lost when it came to these things. It wasn't that the words wouldn't come to mind. Instead, far too many words came to mind. If I start mumbling and stuttering all this to her, I'll just freak Uraraka out. Along with the words flooding through came all the doubts. Izuku had one for all. He had so much to live up to. What if revealing these feelings got in the way of his dreams? His goals, just as terrible, what if it got in the way of Uraraka achieving hers? And if she didn't feel the same way, would the revelation destroy their friendship? His demons whispered of uncertainty and rejection until Izuku had all but made up his mind to never spare it a single thought ever again. Beside him, Ochako was stewing in her own indecision. She hadn't intended this when she'd mentioned charging batteries, but here they both were. Since the moment they'd scooted next to each other, she'd recognized this as another chance to confess her feelings. As the minutes ticked by and she finally began to relax, why did just touching shoulders send her heart into such a flutter? Ochako tried to summon the fortitude to go through with it. All those delicate things she was going to tell him on their walk the other day, what were they again? The words refused to be remembered. Suddenly, she was terrified. Was this going to be like their walk back from class? Was this another opportunity that was destined to slip her by? No, came the defiant thought. No, not this time. I have to do something. But what? It was all Ochako could do to keep from crying out. What was she thinking? No, she had to do this. How long had they been sitting here now? Time was running out. She took a long breath and she just have to go for it. No time to plan. No time to compose delicate words. She opened her mouth to speak and nothing came out. Her throat felt dry, as if the air in the room had suddenly gotten thinner. The glass of water sat on the table in front of her, but Ochako didn't dare move from where she sat. She sat, swallowing quickly. She tried again. She opened her mouth. Once again, her voice failed her. Now she wasn't nervous. She was angry. It wasn't fair. Ochako always proudly spoke up and found her voice, but now it was running away from her. She didn't understand. Why, every time she tried to confess, Ochako couldn't go through with it. Why was she holding back? Unbeknownst to Ochako, even as her mind swam with frustration, her body began to loosen and relax. Her shoulders dropped, her arms settled, her hands unclenched. And somehow, the back of her hand brushed against Izuku's. It was a light, unexpected touch, but her eyes went wide, and she gave such a start that she almost lifted off from the couch. She cautiously peered over, to confirm what she felt happen, and surprise shot her eyes back forward. Again, she went completely rigid. Desperately, she fought the reflex to pull back. It was an accident, she thought. I should apologize. But Izuku hadn't pulled back either. Maybe it was okay. Her mind raced. Izuku felt the back of his hand brush against Uraraka's, and a spark shot through him so suddenly that he thought he'd activated one for all. The touch burst through his tumbling thoughts. Instinctively, he almost pulled back. It was just an accidental touch. It had to be, but then he noticed that Uraraka hadn't pulled away either. Izuku swallowed. He'd faced down the League of Villains, Stain, Overhaul, criminals and vigilantes, but now it was taking every ounce of late-night courage he could muster to keep from panicking and pulling back. Izuku's nerves were like lightning bolts. There they both sat. Time seemed to slow, then speed up, and it just didn't matter. It all seemed surreal. Izuku and Ochako were both capable, talented students. They went to class, told jokes, ate lunch together. They helped each other train, supported and encouraged each other. But here, away from classes and their responsibilities as heroes in training, they felt like something else. They felt both skittish and flushed with reassurance, although neither could possibly explain why. Time ticked on. Rain tapped against glass. With each breath, Ochako felt herself calming down. How long had it been now? Her heart was still beating like she'd run 10 miles, but there wasn't much she could do about that. It's okay, she soothed herself. You're just sitting with Deku on the couch. You're charging your batteries. That's all, it's fine. Another deep breath, and she felt the tension flowing out of her shoulders. She let herself gently recline back. Her eyelids began to drift and she blinked them back open. Perhaps she was just tired, but now that Ochako had a chance to get used to it, this was kind of comfortable. It felt good. The corners of her mouth began to curve. A faint smile began flitting across Ochako's face. Finally, it just stayed there. Maybe it was okay for her to indulge her feelings. Just this little bit, just this once. Ochako felt her eyelids droop. Drowsiness patted her on the shoulder. She really was tired, wasn't she? Smiling, she let her eyes flutter closed. Izuku didn't know how long it had been. 5 minutes, 10. It was late, he was sure. Perhaps it was the hazy light, the quiet of the room and the gentle rhythm of rain on glass, but eventually Izuku felt his head beginning to dip. This is actually comfortable, he thought pleasantly, leaning back into the couch. Izuku's eyes felt heavier than they had just a moment ago. Maybe this battery charging thing was really working. He let his lips curl into a small, wobbly, content smile. He'd spent the last few days fighting the tug of war between his mind and heart. But not right now, Izuku thought, his eyes beginning to close. It was okay for his heart to win out a little bit. Just this one time, as he drifted off, Izuku felt a gentle touch as something soft came to rest on his shoulder. Groggily, Izuku found himself waking up. His mind tried to place if he was in another dream. It certainly could have been. Everything looked off. Furniture was arranged neatly on the ceiling. He opened his eyes a little wider. No, this certainly wasn't a dream, but there was no mistaking the couch and coffee table overhead. There was a small movement against his chest. Izuku looked down. Realization hit him like a brick. Breathing softly against his chest was Uraraka. Her cheek was smooched against his shirt, a tiny smile curving her lips. Realizing his arms were wrapped around her, Izuku sprung them away. But Uraraka stayed right there, her own arms wrapped snugly around him, appearing completely content and snoozing away. He felt her chest rise and fall as she slumbered, and Izuku's face flushed enough for 10 sunsets. He put his hand to his mouth to keep from crying out. Izuku remembered now they had been sitting on the couch, charging each other's batteries. They must have fallen asleep. The furniture he saw on the ceiling wasn't actually on the ceiling, it was on the ground. They were floating. Uraraka must have activated her quirk in her sleep. This is fine, Izuku thought desperately. Uraraka and I fell asleep. That's okay, we were just charging each other's batteries and fell asleep. It's fine, really, as smoothly as he could, which wasn't smooth at all under the circumstances. Izuku looked out the windows. Fresh raindrops streaked down the glass. Still dark outside, not morning yet. Good. No chance anybody had caught them like this. Izuku took deep breaths to steady himself. Just as he reached a semblance of composure, he glanced down and there was Uraraka right there. Her face was so close. She rubbed her cheek into his chest and Izuku thought his heart would stop. He was going to have to wake her. But she looked so peaceful, whispered his heart, and Izuku shot the thought down immediately. Get it together, Izuku. They couldn't stay this way. The thought of getting found like this by their classmates was unbearable. You Uraraka, he could barely make his voice more than a whisper. Uraraka's breathing stayed calm. She didn't budge. Her face is so close. Izuku's head was spinning, and not from the lack of gravity. Hey, Uraraka, he said, hardly louder. Izuku didn't want to startle her. Her face gave a subtle twitch. To Izuku's horror, Uraraka's arms gave him a little squeeze. His freckles would burn off if this continued any longer. You Uraraka. The louder he got, the less Izuku could keep his voice from shaking. We need to get back to our rooms. Uraraka stirred on his chest and murmured something unintelligible. A dissonance of conflicting feelings swirled through Izuku until it felt like his head would pop. Finally, Uraraka's eyes began to open. Izuku caught a glimpse of brown irises peeking out from behind fluttering lashes. Duh. Who? The fog of sleep was still in her eyes. She blinked. Uraraka raised her face off his chest. She blinked again, looking down at his shirt with groggy confusion. Then, her eyes shot wide. Uraraka slowly, carefully craned her face up until her eyes locked with Izuku's. Both their faces, no more than a foot apart, heated like kettles. The tension snapped. Realizing her arms were wrapped around him, Uraraka tried to spring away from Izuku, but the lack of gravity sent them both tumbling through the air, bumping along the ceiling. We're floating. Your quirk. Right, sorry. Uraraka pressed her finger pads together and they both crashed back to the ground, far clumsier than could be expected from students of the UA Hero course. They were back on their feet in an instant. Spinning to face each other, they nearly talked over each other in hurried embarrassment. Sorry, sometimes I activate my quirk when I'm asleep. And no, it's okay. Are you sure? Yes, I'm fine. Izuku and Ochako stood there, neither quite looking at the other. Finally, Izuku said, I wasn't, at the same time that Ochako said, I shouldn't, and they cut off together. Long seconds passed filled with fidgeting and blotted red faces. Adrenaline settled, silence overtook them, the only sound coming from the rain bouncing off windows. Their eyes were focused on the carpet in front of their toes. Hearts pumped desperately. Whatever courage they'd managed to find earlier in the evening was gone. Now they were petrified. Thank you, Izuku finally said. I guess my B battery really was low. Me too, Ochako responded, trying her best to sound lighthearted. I didn't realize how much I needed a charge. Silence again. There was something close and delicate between them now, rebuffing their attempts for normalcy. I better get back to bed, Ochako said after a moment. Izuku gave a nervous nod, anxious to leave the common room. Yeah, right, me too. They briefly caught each other's eye, wished each other a hurried good night, and turned back to their respective half of the dorms. Once past the kitchen, Izuku gingerly took the stairs. The first few steps he took one at a time, but soon he was lunging up them in a sudden burst of suppressed energy. He tiptoed quietly back down the hall to his room on the second floor. As he closed the door, Izuku let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He looked at the alarm clock. 3 in the morning. How long had Uraraka and him slept? How long had they been asleep in each other's arms? The thought made his heart jolt. It was too late to try and sort this rush of new feelings. The sheets were cool as Izuku crawled into his bed. He closed his eyes but sleep didn't come. He wiggled his feet, ruffled his hair, and turned on his side. Nothing. He screwed his eyes shut tighter. Sleep, he thought pleadingly. Just for a few more hours. But he was restless and exhausted, antsy and tired. What was wrong with him? This is it, he thought. Izuku had to sort this out. No more ignoring it, no more pushing it down. But not tonight. No more tonight. It was time to sleep. Okay, brain, Izuku begged. Relax. Time to quiet down. Izuku opened his eyes and looked outside his veranda doors. Still raining. He watched drops of water slowly slink down the glass, one by one, until at long last sleep came for him as if it had been waiting the whole time. Izuku's lashes fluttered closed as he took a long, defeated sigh. A floral scent tickled his nose. It was coming from his shirt. For once, he didn't fight the fresh, intimate memories that swirled through his head. Izuku let them comfort him as he fell asleep. Chapter 4. The morning air was fresh and earthy against Izuku's face. On the running trail looping through the UA forest, the ground was springy from the previous night's rainfall. Izuku made great, bouncy strides as he powered through his morning run. The hiss of charged green energy snapped around his limbs as One for All shot through him, pushing his muscles and straining his bones. He kept his full cowling at a steady 5%. Without equipment, Izuku didn't want to risk overdoing it. Izuku could still remember how it first felt using his quirk. In the beginning, he'd had no control. The energy ripped through his muscles, shattering his bones. It had been terrifying to hold so much power inside himself. Now, controlling even a small percentage of One for All felt exhilarating. The experience was still novel. Each stride was a thrill. His senses were on fire. Trees faded into blurs. Masked buntings and pale thrush burst from cover as he passed, rising into the air in flurries of feathers and echoing bird calls. Each breath was punctuated by the fresh scent of pine needles and wet leaves. He was alive. Rounding the next bend of trees, Izuku came to the trail's starting line. Iida knelt to the side of the track. The class rep gently probed his calves and engine ports. Looking up, Iida gave Izuku a wave and called out an energetic greeting. Sliding to a stop on the slick dirt, Izuku wished his friend a good morning. "How are your engines?" Iida smiled, promptly reporting, "My engines are doing wonderfully, thank you. I can find no irregularities." Since their injuries from encountering Hero Killer Stain, Iida had strictly seen to the upkeep of his quirk every morning before his runs. Plenty of time had passed and the class rep hadn't found any lasting injuries, much to Izuku's relief. "You seem to be pushing yourself harder this morning," Iida observed. Izuku blinked. "Yeah, just something on my mind." "Aha!" Iida shouted. Sometimes Izuku thought Iida could slice through steel with the way he flailed his hands about. Feeling inspired by the example of our instructors and fellow classmates. "Yeah, Iida," Izuku laughed. "Something like that." As he started off on another lap through the trees, Izuku's mind threatened to drift. There was so much to sort out. About his feelings, and Uraraka, about everything that happened, and what he really wanted. "Uraraka and I are fantastic friends," he thought. In their pursuit of being heroes, did they really have time to be anything more? As his thoughts threatened to capsize him, Izuku's run slowed to a jog, and then from a jog down to a shuffle. There was a tender trembling in his chest, and not from the run. Memories swirled, of deep brown eyes, bright laughter, and a smile like the sun. Suddenly the sound of engines approached from behind. Iida sprinted up and gave Izuku a slap on the back. "Come on," Iida shouted, and then blew past him with a competitive smile. Izuku shook his head until his teeth rattled. There would be time for thinking later. In fact, at this rate Izuku expected he'd spend the whole rest of the day thinking. But not now, time to fire the jets, he thought with a smirk. Digging his heels in, Izuku shot off in pursuit of Iida, green lightning streaking out behind him like an after-image. The door to Heights Alliance opened to reveal a bright morning as Ochako and Sue stepped outside. The air smelt raw and fragrant after raining the night before. Wet grass sparkled under the morning sun. In celebration of the bright day, Ochako wore a yellow cotton blouse and dark capris. Sue wore a white collarless cotton top, with pale blue pants that came down just below her knees. The girls beamed at each other as they walked. Hado had invited the two first years out for a day of shopping in the city. The upperclassmen had insisted, although Sue and Ochako hadn't needed convincing. It would be a pleasant break from their coursework. They were grateful to spend some time with Hado, who'd become something like a big sister since they'd begun their work-study with the UQ agency. They gripped their bags in excitement. "This will be just what I need," Ochako sighed. A day out with Sue and Hado. A day without getting swept up in the current of her heart. At least, that's what she hoped. Who knew, Ochako might even buy herself something. As the girls went to turn down the main thoroughfare before the dorms, they caught the tail end of a conversation between two students. "Oh no," Ochako thought. She recognized one of those voices. Oh no 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 no, she wasn't ready to face him yet, not after last night. Quick, Ochako thought, maybe if she hurried, Sue and her could double back. But it was too late. Around the corner strode Iida and Izuku. Their appearance was quite the contrast to the girls, with sweat running off their faces and spots of dirt dotting their athletic uniforms. Iida had his chin up, in the middle of a proud lecture, while Izuku looked up at him with a patient smile. Ochako hastily looked around. There, to her right. A bush. If she could just dive behind it before. Sue. Uraraka. Iida's voice boomed in the open air. "Good morning." Ochako turned her face forward. She locked eyes with Izuku. Crap. As the boys stopped in front of them, Ochako was vaguely aware of Sue wishing them a good morning. Her senses rebuffed any sensation of the world around her. Ochako fixed her eyes upon the space between them with an empty, thousand-yard stare. It wasn't that she didn't want to see Izuku. It was just too soon, after what happened last night. She hadn't had the chance to process it. They'd certainly have to talk about what happened. But not right now, please, not now. Iida and Sue's conversation hit Ochako's ears as muffled mumblings. She hadn't heard Izuku speak yet. Why isn't he talking? She wondered. Did she dare look at him? She looked. He was staring at the ground between them. His mouth was a shaky, wobbly line that Ochako couldn't possibly read. Iida and him must have run really hard, she thought, if Izuku's face was still so red. She tried not to notice the way his freckles framed his cheeks. Wait, was that a new freckle? No, she realized, it was just a spot of mud. Stop thinking about his freckles, Ochako. This was a disaster waiting to happen. She had to find a way out before. That is wonderful, Uraraka. Iida's words sliced through her panic and slammed her back into reality. The class rep regarded her with boundless zeal. At her shoulder, Ochako could feel Sue watching her curiously. Sorry, she quickly covered. I was distracted and didn't hear you. Undeterred, Iida gladly clarified, Sue was telling us how you'll be meeting with Hado-san today. It is a great opportunity to gain valuable insight from a third-year student. Ochako's brain lit up with an idea. Hado. Of course, there was her way out. Yes, she said, clapping her hands in front of her. We're so excited. She hopped over behind Sue. In fact, Hado-san is waiting for us right now. She grabbed Sue's shoulders. So we really should get going. She tugged and Sue let out a little ribbit. Want to stay punctual and all that? Ochako let out a laugh that was too dry to be natural. Yes, of course, Iida agreed. We'll leave you to it. Have fun, you too. The class rep proudly began marching back to the dorms, dragging a numb Izuku behind him. As the girls started on their way, Sue remarked, Ochako. You can stop pushing me now. Right, Ochako said. Sorry. She let go of her friend's shoulders and fell in beside her. The morning was bright, the air filled with bird calls, and with every step Ochako could feel the aura of expectation radiating out from Sue. Her friend had been studying the interaction between Izuku and her carefully. Sue was always very perceptive. Footsteps crunching on the damp earth, they walked on. They passed some trees alongside the path, splashes of sunlight dancing through thick green leaves. Ochako found the tension almost unbearable. When Sue finally spoke, she nearly jumped out of her shoes. Did something happen between Midoriya and you, Ochako? Instinctively, she recoiled away from the question. What? Something happened? What do you mean, something happened? Something happened between you two, all right. Sue sounded smug, satisfied with her conclusion. Ochako fell a few steps back. She collected herself, before catching back up to her friend. In a small voice, she confessed, something did happen. Last night, it's got me all stirred up. I don't know what to do. Slouching, she looked at her friend pleadingly. I see. Sue placed a finger to her chin. We can discuss it with Hado-san, if you'd like. I'm sure she'll have good advice. Ochako nodded apprehensively. Good. Sue gave a wide grin. The three of us can talk about it when we're done shopping. She pointed down the path, where Hado was standing up off a bench, waving a pale sun hat at them. She was wearing a bright, airy dress, pale blue, with an openwork pattern of birds along the neckline. On her left wrist bounced a matched pair of bracelets, and on her head she plopped the cream-colored, wide-brimmed sun hat. Good morning. The third year called as they approached. Are you ready to go shopping? Yes, Sue responded bluntly. And when we're done, we have to talk about Ochako's boy problems. Boy problems. Fantastic. Ochako tripped over her feet. Upon returning to the dorms, Izuku mechanically readied himself to go into the city and visit his mom. He took a quick cold shower to clear his head, turned on the hot water to wash, and finished off cold again. It didn't snap him out of his daze, but it helped. Izuku had pushed aside his thoughts and feelings one too many times, and now it had finally caught up with him. His body felt dull and heavy. After stepping out of the shower and wiping himself down, Izuku brushed his teeth and looked at himself in the mirror. He rubbed at the bags under his eyes. In his room, he put on pants and a fresh dark polo shirt, all while lost in a storm of indecisive thoughts. Mind swirling, Izuku stamped his feet to settle them in his shoes, grabbed his backpack, made his way downstairs and across the common room, then out the front doors. There was too much to think about, too much to sort through. He turned down the main thoroughfare towards the city, confounded and muddled. With his head down, Izuku hadn't noticed Todoroki walking down the path ahead of him. The half-cold half-hot user was dressed casually, in a navy button-down over a light t-shirt, with dark jeans and plain sneakers. When he heard footsteps behind him, Todoroki turned to see Izuku a short way back. He waited for his friend to catch up before falling in step beside him. Izuku hadn't seemed to notice Todoroki at all, lost in thought as he was. Tiny mumbles escaped from Izuku's lips as he muttered to himself. Midoriya. Izuku about jumped out of his skin. Todoroki regarded him neutrally as the boy caught his breath. If Izuku didn't know any better, he'd think Todoroki got some amusement out of surprising him like that. Sorry, he gasped, rubbing his hair. I didn't see you. I was thinking hard. I could tell. Todoroki didn't pry, and Izuku was relieved he didn't. The pair walked on wordlessly. Wind blew through the trees lining the path, rustling the leaves. Izuku asked Todoroki where he was going. Visiting my mother. It's not very far from campus. What about you? Izuku was going to visit his mom, too. It had been a little while since he'd found the excuse to see her. His mom had been ecstatic for the chance to cook for her son again, and Izuku was looking forward to it with equal excitement. Todoroki closed his eyes and nodded, the equivalent of a smile for the reserved boy. The pair continued walking together. As they reached the city streets of Musudafu, they split off waving their goodbyes. Todoroki's distinct red and white hair disappeared in the throng of moving people. Izuku weaved through the crowds feeling clumsy and disorderly. The air was filled with buzzing activity. People were out enjoying their weekend after the rainfall, moving in and out of shops and cafes, smiling and laughing. The bustling streets should have made Izuku feel excited. Instead, he felt overwhelmed. With his own thoughts bouncing discontentedly through his head, there were too many people rushing past, far too much noise and jostling. He'd wanted a quiet trip, just for a chance to sort through the storm roaring through his heart. He tried breathing deeply, hoping it would refresh him enough to clear his head. But even when his mind settled, he'd remember Uraraka's lips curling around the sound of his name. Finally, he reached the train station. He barely paid any attention to where he was going now. Izuku knew the way home by instinct. The train car was active and noisy. He stood to the side, one hand gripping the overhead railing, trying to avoid jabbing elbows. As the train left the station, Izuku spotted a few seats apart from the crowd. Without hesitation, he hurried over and plopped himself down. The train home took nearly an hour. There'd be little Izuku could do to distract himself. All right, brain, he thought while closing his eyes, you wanna think. Then it's time to think. The train car bounced over the tracks. Izuku wrapped his thoughts around himself like a blanket. Soon his mind was drifting back to last night. And Uraraka, even if it had been an accident, even if they hadn't intended it, holding her had felt good. There. It was a terrifying thing to admit, but the admission was accompanied by a kind of odd relief. Yes, Izuku told himself, it had felt good. And holding her hand had felt good, too. His face was going scarlet. Izuku found himself wanting to hold her hand again, and felt guilty for it. He pushed on difficult as it was, confessing those feelings had made them easier to deal with. His heart trembled, but Izuku felt a little better. What else could he admit? The answer came immediately. Izuku swallowed. His heart wouldn't settle down. Why was he shaking? It wasn't like he had to confess anything out loud. Nobody was going to hear him. Deep breaths. He began, he couldn't finish the thought. Izuku gripped his pant legs to keep his hands from trembling. He'd already admitted his crush, to All Might and Kacchan no less. Why did this feel like such a big step? Izuku tried again. He thought, Uraraka. There. That hadn't been so bad, it was like dipping a toe into the pool, to find the water was warm. He repeated it. He liked Uraraka. Good. Again. He liked Uraraka. Izuku endeavored to repeat it again and again, until his mind finally accepted what his heart already knew. First he'd accept it, then he could figure out what came next. You like Uraraka, he repeated. The train rumbled down the rails, and Izuku formed the words into a kind of song he matched with the rhythm of the tracks. You like Uraraka, he though drowsily. He yawned. Maybe, Izuku thought, he could doze off for a bit. He was tired, from lack of sleep and the stress of this last week. You like Uraraka, he hummed it like a lullaby. Wu like Uawaka. Izuku's eyes shot open. Across the aisle, a mother sat holding a young boy. The boy pointed at Izuku and repeated, Wu like Uawaka. Izuku covered his mouth. Had he been saying it out loud? The boy's mother quickly apologized. He's just at that age, she laughed. He repeats everything he hears. Izuku waved to indicate it wasn't a problem. Inside, he was horrified. There was no hope of dozing off now. Deep breaths. Izuku liked Uraraka. That was settled. What now? Last night. Oh gosh, last night. Uraraka and him would have to talk about what happened. And, Izuku swallowed, he might even have to tell Uraraka how he felt about her. Was there any way around it? Izuku wished he hadn't run into her this morning. He wasn't ready to face her yet. What was he supposed to say? This was all entirely new for him. Kaminari was good with girls. Even Kacchan was good with girls. But not Izuku. How am I even going to approach this? What did Izuku even want? There was a faint buzzing in his pocket. Izuku pulled out his phone and checked his messages. Midoriya, you seem troubled this morning. Would you like to talk about it? He sighed. Without responding, he returned the phone to his pocket. Maybe later, he told himself. He spent the rest of the long ride stewing away. Should he tell Uraraka? Should he keep these feelings to himself? Izuku's inexperience with the situation only added to his indecision. Finally, the train slowed, gradually coming to a stop. With a pang of guilt, Izuku almost wished he could go on letting her fill his thoughts. The doors chimed as they slid open, and Izuku stepped out into the crowd. He'd hoped the city would be less bustling near home, but if anything it was busier. Izuku's exhausted mind seemed to pick out every couple from the crowd. There, a boy and girl sat at an outdoor cafe, chatting while holding hands across the table. Over there, a girl was pulling a boy towards a street vendor selling candied apples. Coming out of a storefront was a man and woman with hands full of shopping bags, giving each other content smiles. His imagination had no trouble placing Uraraka and himself in those roles, and it only served to alarm him even more. It was no good. It was too much. Too much to sort, too much to work through. There was no way to distract himself anymore. Frustration filled him to bursting. Frustration with himself, frustration over not knowing what to do, frustration over not knowing how to express these feelings. Izuku gripped the straps of his backpack and took off down the sidewalk in great strides, almost running. He shot down side streets, ducked around corners, and kept going until he was dashing up the apartment steps. Izuku, his mom greeted, opening the front door. Her enthusiasm was quickly snuffed out when she noticed her son panting and sweaty. Izuku, did you run here? Is everything all right? Why, yes, he quickly reassured. I was just so excited to see you. He was getting too good at coming up with excuses. Inko Midoriya's face slipped into a beaming smile. As her eyes began to water, Izuku knew what he was in for, and readied himself. His mom shot forward, embracing him in an emotional, gleeful, painfully backbreaking hug that Izuku couldn't possibly have wiggled out of, one for all or not. Izuku hadn't found much of an appetite on the trip over, but the smells of fresh home cooking twisted his stomach. He peeked in the kitchen. Every burner was running hot, every surface covered. A savory smell tickled his nose as that katsudon. I hope you don't mind, his mom remarked, without the slightest hint of shame. I'm making you some meals to take back. You and your classmates must be so busy, it'll be nice to share some home cooking with them. All he could do was sigh. This wasn't the first time his mom had stocked him up with extra food. That was the only reason he'd brought his backpack. Izuku's time with his mom passed comfortably. She'd laid out quite a spread for breakfast. She watched him eat every bite, remarking she could always make more, until Izuku's tummy felt fit to burst. After they ate, Inko Midoriya made tea and they moved to the living room. Surrounded by the familiarity of his childhood home, Izuku felt a sense of genuine relief. His mom updated him about their neighbors, those who had moved away and those who had recently moved in, and the small changes being made to the neighborhood. After everything Izuku had been through, it was pleasant to hear about these small moments of his mom's day-to-day life. She asked Izuku about his classes and work study. His mom already knew he'd been involved in the incident with the Shihasaikai and overhaul. There was no way he could hide it, the aftermath had been all over the news. As he recounted the experience with more detail, Izuku downplayed his role in the event. He wasn't sure his mom's heart could take it if he told her the full account. He got through the story as quickly as possible, and dove straight into telling her about their school festival. His mom was overjoyed to hear about his class, concert, and all the games put on by other students. Izuku pointedly dodged the topic of gentle criminal, and instead highlighted the tightened security provided by UA teachers. His mom nodded along eagerly. I'm happy to hear they're taking students' security so seriously. Izuku flashed her a bright smile. It's really impressive. What about your friends, Izuku? There was that one with the engines. Was that Iida? And who was that girl you met at the entrance exam? Izuku had been raising his teacup to his mouth, and nearly tipped it over his lap. You mean Uraraka? Yes, Uraraka. She sounds so sweet, the way you talk about her. You should really bring her by sometime. I'd love to meet her. This time Izuku really did spill his tea. His mom sprang from her seat to help him wipe down his shirt, but Izuku was already standing. Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of it. He rushed to the bathroom. Pulling off his shirt, he fumbled with the knob on the sink, running water over the dark spots. Once he was satisfied, he cupped his hands and splashed cool water over his face. He felt hot as a furnace. You like Uraraka, his heart teased. Izuku already knew that, all too well. This was silly. He couldn't keep jumping when someone mentioned her name. He couldn't keep freezing up every time he saw her. Izuku dried off his face. He went to his room and put on a fresh shirt, putting the wet one out to dry. You're going to go out there, he thought, and tell your mom about your friends. That's all. His mom was still sitting in the living room, and Izuku smiled encouragement as he sat down and started talking excitedly about his friends. His mom seemed relieved. The noonday sun hung lazily in the sky by the time Izuku started walking back to campus. His mom had sent him off with enough meals to keep him fed for a week. His backpack bulged, smelling so strongly of meat and spices that a cat passing by turned round and sniffed in astonishment. Izuku decided to find a place away from the busy weekend crowds, where he could sit and finally sort through all he was feeling. He took a passageway under the tracks to the west side of the station. After spending some time walking around that neighborhood, Izuku found a small, tiled plaza surrounded by raised flower beds. It had a little sculpture and some handsome benches. More importantly, it was deserted. Izuku was alone. He picked a bench and sat down. Okay, he thought, let's do this. His mind opened like a floodgate. He'd have to talk to Uraraka about last night. The sensation of her breathing against his chest echoed like a dream. Guilt stabbed him. He tried to think clearly, but he couldn't focus on any one thing. All that came to mind, again and again, was her kindness, the way Uraraka's face glowed when she wished him luck, and the way her eyes glistened as she looked up at the stars. She always carried the stars in her eyes. There was no denying his feelings now, at least not in the safety of Izuku's mind. Should he tell her? The thought made his heart skip. It had been quite enough to admit those feelings to himself. How could he ever confess them to Uraraka? The more he thought about telling her, the more he bounced between absolute certainty and doubt. Familiar insecurities attacked him from all sides. What if she didn't feel the same way? That was a nasty thought, one which Izuku had tried not to think about. Surely if Uraraka felt the same, she would have told him already. She was too brave to keep her feelings bottled up like Izuku was doing. That only made him feel worse. His stomach did somersaults. Izuku scrubbed his hands through his hair. This wasn't working out like he hoped. Things were complicated and tangled together. He couldn't separate them out. He didn't know how to untangle it all. He needed help. Izuku pulled out his phone. He found the message he'd gotten earlier, while riding the train. He'd nearly forgotten about it. Midoriya, you seem troubled this morning. Would you like to talk about it? Izuku hoped they weren't offended by his late response. Yeah, that would really help. Want to meet for lunch? There was the light jingle of a bell as Izuku opened the door to the soba restaurant. The staff greeted him cheerfully as they moved about. He wasn't sure he'd gotten the right place, but seeing the flash of white and red hair near the register put him at ease. Todoroki held up a hand as Izuku hurried over. After his friend reassured Izuku that he hadn't been waiting long, they placed their order. It was a smaller place, but well maintained. The lunch crowd had mostly dispersed and there were plenty of free seats. Izuku had the sense that his friend had been to this restaurant a number of times before. Todoroki insisted on paying. It's my old man's card, was all he said. They sat on tall stools at a countertop which ran along the front window. It was a pleasant view onto the busy, sunny street. The pair would be able to talk without being disturbed. Sorry I didn't respond sooner, Izuku began. It's okay, Todoroki shook his head. You were distracted. Izuku wasn't sure what to say, finally volunteering, how is your mom? My mother's doing well, Todoroki responded, a hint of warmth in his voice. She seems to have more energy every time I see her. The nurses say she's never been so lively. Izuku smiled at his friend. I'm glad. Me too. How is your mother? The pair talked about the breakfast spread Izuku's mother made, and all the extra meals she'd sent him back with. She'd been so happy to see him. Todoroki listened with a kind of odd fascination. The circumstances of Izuku's home life were so different from Todoroki's, it seemed like another world. Their food arrived, cold soba noodles for Todoroki, and cake soba for Izuku. He was pleasantly surprised. Izuku hadn't been hungry after his large breakfast, but the noodles were tender, the broth was tasty, and he soon found himself slurping up the food. After a few bites, Todoroki turned to Izuku. There's been something troubling you lately. You wanted to talk through it, right? Yes, Izuku said. He was unsure how to begin. Todoroki waited patiently. It's my heart, he said. Lately it's been feeling stirred up and. Izuku cut off, suddenly abashed. He became very interested in stirring his broth, so he wouldn't have to meet Todoroki's eyes. You don't need to hold back, Todoroki said smoothly. You like Uraraka. What? Izuku nearly knocked over his bowl. That's. How did. Midoriya, you like Uraraka. Izuku thought his eyes were going to fall out onto the floor. His mouth hung open. There was no denying it now, not after Todoroki put it out there so bluntly. Izuku almost asked how he'd figured it out, but he didn't really want to know. He closed his mouth, but only to swallow. Why yes, Izuku's voice came out dry. Actually, I have for a while now. I didn't know what it was at first. I guess I thought we were just growing closer as friends. Then I thought it was just a crush. But now. Izuku swallowed. I think it's more than that. I can't get her off my mind. Todoroki calmly asked. You haven't approached her with these feelings? No. Izuku shook his head furiously. In a softer voice, he continued, we're all trying our best to become heroes. Since All Might retired, there's a lot more pressure. I don't want my feelings to interfere with our goals. Uraraka wants to help her parents so badly. She's an amazing hero. I don't want to distract her from that. Izuku looked at Todoroki with a sad smile. Besides, I never had many friends growing up. Uraraka is special to me, but I don't want to lose her friendship if she doesn't feel the same way. Izuku pulled back, feeling his face heating. I'm sorry, that sounded selfish. No, it's okay, Midoriya. Todoroki sat, tranquil as a koi pond. You don't want your feelings to get in the way. Izuku nodded, fast and tight. But now they are getting in the way, or else you wouldn't be feeling so stirred up. Did something happen? Izuku had been dreading this. Shakily, Izuku tried to put the events of the last week in order. He told Todoroki everything, starting from when Uraraka had asked for his help training her quirk. He winced as he talked about stargazing, flinched when he described holding her hand, and recoiled in shivers as he spoke about what had happened last night. Repeating it out loud, Izuku could hardly believe it all. Todoroki listened patiently, without interrupting and without question. He caught everything, and seemed worried by nothing. When Izuku had finished, he looked over. Todoroki was staring into his food, stirring his noodles and seemingly lost in thought. The half-hot half-cold user softly closed his eyes and mumbled a noncommittal, The silence quickly grated against Izuku's nerves. What is he thinking? Finally, Todoroki looked at him. Uraraka likes you, too. What? Why you think so? Based on what you told me, yes. Do you think I'm overthinking it? I think you're overthinking it. Izuku slipped off his stool. Todoroki slurped up his noodles as his friend climbed back onto his seat. But, Izuku exclaimed. The doubts reared up, strong as ever. If Izuku got in the way of everything Uraraka was working for, he didn't think he could live with himself. And then there was Izuku's dream. One for all, he was supposed to become the next symbol of peace. Todoroki shot him a curious look, and Izuku continued in a more level tone. Our goals, what if it holds us back? What if these feelings keep us from being the strongest heroes we can be? In a flash, Todoroki's expression cooled. He looked down at the countertop and took a slow, deep breath. He held it, and then let it out. My old man, Todoroki began, before trailing off. Izuku tensed. His friend rarely spoke about his father. Being raised by Endeavor had left a strong impression on Todoroki. Izuku waited, stiff and patient. Todoroki raised his gaze to watch the people passing by outside the window. The boy's expression softened. He continued, My father set his sights on becoming the #1 hero. On becoming the strongest hero. To achieve that, he put aside everything he thought would get in the way. Compassion, empathy, affection, love, even his marriage and children, he used as a way to pursue his ends. Now that my old man has achieved his goal, I think he regrets all that he neglected in order to get there. What did his single-minded devotion amount to? A broken marriage, a shattered family, a lonely existence. Now all my father wants is to pick up the pieces, to make amends for all he lost along the way. Izuku jumped as Todoroki turned towards him and calmly stated, Midoriya, look at your right hand. Hesitantly, Izuku held up his hand, inspecting the scars trailing along it. Todoroki regarded him with a neutral expression, but there was warm affection in his voice. My old man shattered his family in pursuit of the title of #1. You, however, shattered yourself to help me heal. You broke your bones, and then broke them again, all to help me accept myself and find my own path. You opened your heart to me, Midoriya. Because of that, I was able to open my own heart, too. Thanks to you, I've been able to reconnect with my mother and face my past. I've started down a better path, one that I've chosen for myself. Izuku watched his friend. Todoroki's eyes were serene, his tone steady. I think my old man was wrong. As heroes, it's our capacity for compassion and kindness, and love, which makes us strong. We shouldn't push that aside. We should embrace it, it'll only make us better heroes. Izuku didn't know what to say. About Uraraka. Maybe she won't accept your feelings. Maybe she'll want to focus on her own dreams. But you don't have the right to make that choice for her. Todoroki had delivered that last with a chill bite. The cold experience in Todoroki's voice made Izuku shiver. It stung, but he knew it was true. Whatever the outcome, open your heart to her. That's what I believe you should do. If you keep ignoring these feelings and pushing them down, they'll only come back in a worse, uglier way. Todoroki's voice quickly warmed as he continued. Tell her how you feel. If you can't find the words, find another way, find some way to show her. Open your heart to her, Izuku. Izuku stared in shock. His first name, Todoroki, the essence of formality, had never called Izuku by his first name before. To anyone else, the slight upturn of Todoroki's lips would have hardly registered as a smile. But to Izuku, Todoroki might as well have been beaming. Izuku beamed back. The two boys turned to their food. Thank you, Shoto. Todoroki gave a muted nod. The pair continued their meal in comfortable silence. Ochako did her best to avoid jabbing elbows and rushing feet. She watched people of all kinds walking past, people selling souvenirs, people ducking into shops and restaurants. It was difficult not to feel excited. On the street ahead of her, Hado maneuvered deftly through the weekend crowd. The upperclassman weaved around people as elegantly as the energy she produced with her quirk, untroubled by her oversized sun hat or the 4 shopping bags balanced on her shoulder. Ochako and Sue hurried to keep up, like a pair of ducklings following their mother. How many stores had Hado taken them to? Ochako lost count after the 5th. Watching Hado shop had been an experience. Ochako had never seen anything like it. The third year flowed from browsing, to outfit, to dressing, to register, and back again, all so fluidly it seemed like a dance. And Hado had bought so much. Ochako could never imagine spending that much on clothes. Sheepishly, she eyed the shopping bag in her hand. It was just one new outfit, that was all. One small indulgence after a week full of conflicted feelings. That was fine. It does look really cute on me, Ochako reasoned. Hado had decided they'd had enough shopping for the day, and was taking her proteges to one of her favorite tea rooms. Hado's treat, she'd insisted. Neither Ochako or Sue knew where they were being led, so they did their best to keep up and hoped to get there in one piece. Remarkably, Hado had spent the last few minutes talking nonstop. All these people must be out because of the rain earlier this week, Hado said. That must be it. There aren't any festivals. At least, I don't think there are. I didn't check. Gosh, I love festivals. It's so busy. I hope we can get a table at the tea room. We should be fine if we hurry. Are you two keeping up all right? You know, I took Yukio to this place a couple times. She liked it, but she doesn't really go for tea. Yukio doesn't like tea. She doesn't. I was surprised too. She always looks so ornate. You'd think she'd enjoy it more. She likes their cakes though. Oh, their cakes. You're going to love them. They're so yummy. I wonder how they make them so small. Do you think they have tiny baking equipment? Maybe I'll ask to peek in the kitchen. Wouldn't that be fun if? Ochako laughed as Hado continued her rambling. Today hadn't gone the way she'd expected, but it had certainly been a nice break. Plus, she'd managed to make it through their whole shopping experience without once having to talk about what was going on between her and Izuku. Maybe Sue and Hado had forgotten about her boy problems. Ochako doubted it. Sue was unlikely to forget so easily, and Hado's bubbliness could be an enigma, but there was always a chance. Abruptly, Ochako bounced into Hado's back. Saying hasty apologies, she looked up to discover the upperclassman had stopped. Hado was pointing across the street at a tall, regal building. It must have been 20 stories tall, with intricate brick work, all painted white with gleaming windows. We're here, Hado proudly declared. She grabbed Ochako and Sue by the hand and marched across the street with her proteges in tow. As they got closer, Ochako saw flowing gold letters above the front doors which read, Royal Pacific Hotel. This wasn't at all what Ochako had expected. Smiling sweetly, Hado walked straight up to the doors, thanked the doorman, and led them inside. It was packed and just as noisy as outside. The lobby was more expansive than any Ochako had ever seen. Not that she had ever gotten to stay in many hotels, but she couldn't imagine staying in a place like this. The floors were so reflective they could do for mirrors. Delicate chandeliers hung from the tall ceiling. It was abuzz with activity, with guests lounging on furniture, phones ringing off the hook, and bellhops hustling every which way. Hado led them onward. The tea room was just across the lobby. It was like entering an entirely different building. Here it was more subdued, much to Ochako's relief. The lunchtime crowd was thick, but they were approached by a kind waitress immediately. The server seemed to know Hado. She must be a regular after all, Ochako thought. The trio were sat across from each other at a circular table, where they were brought 3 glasses of ice water. Virtually every table in the room was taken, the space filled with conversation and laughter. Ochako had never been in a place like it before. Was this what Hado did in her free time? She looked over at Sue, desperate for any hint about how to behave, but her classmate looked just as lost. Not wanting to embarrass themselves, Ochako and Sue took their cues from Hado. They watched the older girl set her shopping bags next to her chair, and set her purse elegantly on the table. The first years followed sweet. Hado beamed at them and took off her sun hat, placing it over her bag, covering it completely. The same cheery waitress came back to take their order. Hado ordered them a pot of jasmine tea, some tiny pastries, and a tonic water for herself. Sue delicately took a sip of ice water, drinking slowly. Ochako downed half her glass in one big gulp. She prayed the cool liquid would soothe her tension. Ochako was still worried her friends would ask about Izuku. The unfamiliar environment only added to her unease. Isn't this such a nice little place? Hado sighed pleasantly. Across the table, Sue and Ochako exchanged looks. Neither of the girls would call this place little. The space was practically as big as Lunch Rush Cafeteria, and nearly as busy. While their gazes continued to roam around the tea room, the waitress came back with a silver tray. She set down a stand which was piled with tiny cakes, flans, and tarts. Sue and Ochako sniffed the air eagerly. Then, the waitress placed a cup in front of each of them and poured each full of tea from an ornamental teapot. The waitress set the teapot down on the table between the 3 girls. Placing an ice-filled glass in front of Hado, the server filled it halfway with tonic water, gave a polite smile, and left accompanied by their thanks. Hado held her glass in both hands as she took a long sip. The light of laughter filled her eyes, and she giggled while setting the glass down. I like the bubbles, she gleefully remarked. Ochako smiled politely. Her feet tapped anxiously under the table. Sue had taken one of the pastries from the stand, and was turning it over in her hand. It looked too delicate to eat, with a perfect little swirl of fluffy white topping. Hado grinned at her expectantly. Sue took an experimental bite, and beamed at Ochako. It was good. Ochako took a small cake and bit off a perfectly cut corner. Her taste buds came alive with spice and sweetness. She realized then that she hadn't had much for breakfast. She felt ravenous. Ochako took another bite before she'd finished swallowing the first. Help yourselves, Hado insisted. The tea is wonderful too. The first years both took sips of the steaming beverage. The flavors were delightful. Ochako breathed in the rich smells of the cake and the tea and sighed at how charming it all was. She began to relax. It really was beautifully cozy in here. Well, now that we're all settled, Hado chimed, raising her teacup to her lips. What boy is it, Uraraka? Ochako's heart dropped, and took the blood from her face with it. She shrank back into her chair as if trying to hide. Just when I thought I was safe. It's Midoriya, Sue said levelly. Oh, Midoriya. Hado clapped her hands together. He's a little plain looking, but what a powerful quirk, and so kind and sweet. You have excellent tastes. How long has this been going on? Are you two dating? Dating. The word made Ochako want to float to the ceiling and disappear. Did they have to be so loud? She began. Thankfully, as she dissolved into wordless murmurs, Sue took it upon herself to update Hado. No, Sue clarified, Ochako and Midoriya weren't dating, at least not to Sue's knowledge, but something seemed to have happened, and it had put Ochako on edge. Both girls looked at her with anticipation. Ochako took another quick sip of tea. The cup rattled in her fingers. She was perfectly trapped, with no way out but to tell them. She clasped her hands on her knees with her thumbs twiddling. Promise you won't tell anyone. We promise, Sue and Hado said in unison. Despite her hesitation and red cheeks, Ochako began recounting events in a crackled little voice. She started with Deku helping her train, and went on from there. She'd meant to hold back some of the more delicate details. But as more and more words poured out, she found herself retelling everything. She couldn't stop herself. Her eyes grew wider and wider by the word, in shock that she was telling them so much. Sue goggled at her, with a finger to her chin. Hado watched with amusement, smiling so wide that it seemed her face would break. Oh Ochako, Sue chimed softly. You held hands in the rain. I don't know how it happened. Ochako pleaded, twirling her thumbs in an anxious pink whirl. Eat some cake, said Hado. You were going to confess to him while walking back from class. How bold. Ochako chomped at cake she was not really tasting. I didn't know if I'd get a better chance. A midnight meeting in the common room, said Sue, ticking it off like she was adding to a list. Charging each other's batteries, Hado winked. That's very clever of you. I didn't mean for us to try it. Ochako was so flustered that she finished her cake without noticing what kind it had been. She took a long drink of water, draining the rest of the glass, then slapped her hands to her face. Her voice was muffled between her fingers. I don't know what to do. I don't understand, Hado said cheerfully. You two would be great together. Why not just go for it? Ochako's eyes nearly shot out her head. Sue joined in. It sounds like Midoriya really likes you. Clearly, Hado insisted. Why not tell him? Sue pressed. Like I said, Ochako wailed, I've tried. A few times. Then what stopped you? Hado asked with a curious bounce to her curls. What had stopped her? Time and again Ochako had come so close to telling Izuku how she felt, only for it to slip through her fingers. Objections piled up on her tongue in a tangle that let nothing out. Maybe, Sue suggested, she's afraid Midoriya won't return her feelings. No way, Hado reasoned. Ochako's braver than that. Besides, he definitely likes her. Maybe Ochako's just playing hard to get. She wouldn't do that. Mina might, but not Ochako. It must be something else. Oh, do you need practice? Hado slapped her palms on the table. Here, I'll be Midoriya. Hado-san, I don't think. Come on, Ochako. Just imagine I have green hair and freckles. Go on, ask me out. I want to save people. The words flew from Ochako's mouth before she could catch them. There it was. Ochako glanced around quickly. She'd expected her outburst to echo to the ceiling, yet nobody nearby seemed to notice. Sue blinked at her. Hado gave a satisfied nod, as if to say, go on. Ochako swallowed. No going back now. I want to be a hero that saves everyone. To save people and make them happy. That's what I want, more than anything. It's the whole reason I'm here. My mom and dad supported my dream. They always believed in me, and I want to make them proud. And Deku's trying his hardest, too. He works so hard so he can save others. That's why I'm holding back. I have to keep pushing these feelings down, so they don't keep us from our dreams. There, it was all out in the open. Ochako eyed Sue. Her friend held a finger to her chin, looking lost, unsure how to respond. Maybe someday, Ochako remarked sadly. She really was in quite the dilemma. Once we're pros, or when everything's more settled, or, I don't know, someday. Across the table, Hado loudly cleared her throat. Ochako and Sue looked at the upperclassmen. Hado took a small sip of tea. When she lowered the teacup, her normal radiant smile was replaced with a level, considered look. Ochako, I've worked with Yukio for a while now. I've had more exposure to the world of the pros than either of you. Mind if I pass on some advice? That measured voice sounded odd coming from Hado. Ochako gave a slow, silent nod. Hado encompassed both first years in her gaze. She took on a lecturing tone as he began. The world will demand a lot from us once we become pros. We'll be called on to protect and sacrifice. I've seen it, again and again. It's only natural for us to jump in, to save lives and be the best heroes we can be, but that's exactly why we need to invest in our own happiness. Ochako opened her mouth, and Hado held up a finger to stop her. I know it sounds selfish, but trust me, it isn't. The third year waved her hand, producing a tight spiral of sparkling energy. The happiness we give ourselves is the happiness we give back to others. It's like energy. How can we expect to give others hope if we're filled with regret? Hado closed her hand and the spiral of energy drifted upward, dispersing above the table like smoke. The third year gave Ochako a smile. Not her usual beaming grin, but something soft and encouraging. I understand not wanting to be held back by your feelings. For some people, that would be a real problem. But if Midoriya and you are half the heroes I know you are, I'm not worried. If anything, it'll only make you both stronger. If being with Midoriya makes you happy, don't wait for someday. Tell him, we wouldn't want you becoming a pro filled with regrets, would we? She gave a small wink. Hado-san is right, said Sue. Ochako turned towards her friend, blinking rapidly. Her thumbs had stopped twiddling. She sat still. Nothing is going to stop you from being a hero, Sue continued. You already are one. Remember at our summer training camp? You saved me from that toga girl. She had a knife, and you took her down like it was nothing. It was just gunhead martial arts, Ochako protested softly. You would have done the same. And our ultimate move, Meteor Fafrotsky's, retorted Sue. You were the one who came up with it. Thanks to you, we were able to take out both those gigantification villains in one shot. It just made sense to use our quirks together that way, Ochako said. Don't forget the raid on the Shihasaikai, Sue swept on. You gave everything you had. You could barely even stand. And you still kept going. You're a hero, Ochako, and you'll only keep getting better. I know it, Hado-san knows it, and Yukio knows it too. You couldn't be unheroic if you tried. Ochako longed to brush off the praise, but she didn't get the chance. Sue placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Your parents want you to achieve your dreams, but I'm sure they want you to be happy, too. Listen to your heart, and no matter what happens, we're here to support you, Ribbit. Hado clapped her hands together. You bet we are. For a moment, Ochako thought she might laugh. She'd spent most of the day hoping she wouldn't have to talk about any of this. Now that she had, she was grateful. Her heart felt lighter. The tension she felt about the whole situation was still there, but Ochako was determined to hang on to this fresh courage. With conviction, she decided that no matter what, she was finally going to do it somehow. She was going to confess her feelings to Izuku. Remarkably, along with the usual nerves, her conviction brought a hint of a smile to her lips. Yes, she realized, it really was a smile. She thanked her lucky stars. Ochako had some amazing friends. Talking with them had made quite a difference. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Hado-san. Of course, Hado instantly snapped back into her bubbly, carefree demeanor. I think we all worry about those things. I certainly did when I first started dating. Ochako and Sue's eyes bulged. Before they could ask anything further, there was a buzzing from Ochako's bag. She reached in, pulled out her phone, and made a sound like a startled cat. Sue and Hado watched her, curiosity floating behind their eyes. It's from Deku. The girls leaned forward, all ears. He says he has an idea about how we could use our quirks together. He wants to meet in the courtyard tonight. Sounds perfect, Sue said with a wide froppy smile. Hado displayed a casually wicked grin. Holding up her teacup, she remarked, no more, some days. No more regrets. She gave a wink and took a sip. Ochako responded with a quick, fast nod, her mouth a thin line of determination. Her friend's encouragement did little to temper the fluttering in her chest, but Ochako wouldn't back down. Not anymore. No matter how nervous she felt, Ochako wouldn't let herself live with any regrets. She was ready. Ochako quickly tapped out a response on her phone. Where stories live. Discover now.